Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. This interview was conducted on Tuesday, August 4th, 2020. I'm speaking with Alan Meyers again. This is part 2 of a series of videos that we plan to make. First one, monetary system, what you need to know but don't. So this is part 2. We're going to continue to go through Alan's Fed Ed pamphlet. So Alan, thank you for coming back. And let's continue then.
Mario, good day. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
It's great honor, privilege to be on your program and being able to share this information. Just to get everybody into it, we're going to review, or I will quickly review modules 1 through 9 from last time, just to kind of set the stage. Module 1 is the origin and development of money. Excuse me one second. The upshot of this whole thing is in the takeaway. And the takeaway is only people, not banks, not governments, created, developed, matured the idea of turning items of barter or money into money and being able to facilitate indirect, non-bartered, peaceful transactions, exchanges for goods and services. The upshot, the concept of money belongs to people, not banks, not governments. Module 2 is a complete list, or a pretty good listing. Yeah, you got all 12 of them, of what I call historical characteristics of money. These characteristics helped people decide what they would use as money at a certain point in time, in a certain culture, in a certain region. The real interesting one, of course, we're going to get to, but this is basically all the characteristics that help define what a culture, a community, a country will use as money.
Alan, just 1 second before what Alan is doing here, so the viewers know, he's just doing a quick summary of the first 9 modules that we went through in the first video. So if you want to listen in more detail, you can, after you finished listening to this part 2, you can go and listen to part 1 again. So let's keep going.
Thank you. Also do note that each module, which you're showing in form, has an opening quote and a takeaway. Module 3 is examples of money from the past. The reason I did this one is to give an indication of how many different things have been money over the history of humanity. I've broken them up between animals, consumables, couture, such as beads, blankets, clamshells, metals, not only gold and silver, but bronze, copper, and iron, and that would be just in lumps, not so much coins. For me, the most amazing form of money was what the Incas had. They literally had tons of gold and silver, but they didn't use gold and silver. In fact, this is my take on it. They gave that gold and silver special names. Gold was referred to as sweat of the sun. Silver was referred to as tears of the moon. Those terms seem to be pretty special. So perhaps they would never use gold and silver in commerce because they wouldn't want to, pun intended, debase it by using it in just simple business. They used cacao beans, which means the money for Incas literally grew on trees. Despite what our parents had told us, what do you think, money grows on trees? Well, for the Incas, it did. Module 4, this is the beginning of talking about money in its current form. There's the term M1. M stands for money, 1 stands for the number 1 supply. We also know M1 in the US for a World War II rifle and a heck of a tank, but we're just talking about money. This comes from economics. This comes from the Fed. There's 4 items that are included in M1. The electronic digits in checking accounts, cash in circulation, coin in circulation, and traveler's checks issued by non-banks. Traveler's checks issued by non-banks is such a small amount. I don't even think about it. Cash, coin, and electronic digits and computerized checking accounts, not savings or anything else. Just checking, also called demand deposits. And we move on to Module 5. Module 5 is what isn't in M1 money today. Well, we know that banks in their vault and teller drawers have a lot of cash and coin. We can imagine the U.S. Treasury has lots of cash and coin. But in their hands, that cash and coin is not part of the M1 money supply. It's not considered in circulation. In their hands, the cash and coin that is part of our M1 money supply is reserves. Reserves and money, not the same thing. They're 2 separate, different, call them mediums of exchange. A person will never have, hold, use, or spend $1 of reserve. Banks in the U.S. Treasury, they will never have, hold, or use $1 of M1 money. Okay. Any questions so far?
No, that's. I think that's one of the important things I learned from you in the first video, is that the Fed actually and the banks, when they deal with each other, they don't deal in money. They deal in reserves.
Well, with the banks and then between banks and the government, that's reserves.
Yeah, no, but that's interesting. It's only when the banks lend out to the public that it becomes M1.
Correct. Next one is, who creates M1 money today in the USA? Well, I've heard many, many times, oh, money is printed, it comes out of thin air, on and on and on. No, it's not correct. Absolutely not. Money comes into existence. And when I say comes into existence, it increases the M1 money supply. Money can also go out of existence, be extinguished. That is, reduce the M1 money supply. There's only one source for M1 money. That is banks. They create it. Fingertips on a keyboard, hit enter. As I said, banks have no money. The U.S. government has no money. And it's not out of thin air.
Not even the Fed has money, does it? I mean, it's the Fed
we're going to get to what the Fed's got.
Yeah.
The people will say, well, okay, fingertips on a keyboard, hit enter, money comes into existence. The M1 money supply is increased because of checking account. That's thin air. And I'll say, well, wait a minute. Most people are familiar with balance sheets, income statements, general ledgers. These are all the basic accounting records in accounting for businesses and for people. I've never heard, and they come from the computerized accounting system. I've never heard one person ever say that a balance sheet, an income statement, or a general ledger, or its supporting journal entries is printed out of thin air. This is the same source that our M1 money comes from. It's not thin air. It's real. It's not physically tangible until you turn the electronic digits into cash and coin. But from a business standpoint, it's very real.
I guess it's not real for us who are not bankers or have a bank, because we wouldn't be able to just create a book entry and lend it to someone. I think that's why people think it's out of thin air, because they don't really have anything backing those entries.
Yes and no, and which we will get to.
Yeah.
The fact that a person who is not a bank cannot do this, I understand. However, that doesn't mean it's thin air, because when people use the term thin air, whatever, I think they begin to disconnect from the topic, which means they won't begin to even try to understand, using their words, what their thin air means. That is a conversation ender. Kind of similar when someone says the phrase conspiracy theory. As soon as that pops into the conversation, conversation's over. Because we can't have any conspiracy theories. They're all wrong. They're all, by crazy people. Well, when you end a conversation without facts, you never were in there.
Yeah. Okay.
We move on to Module 7, which is what is a Federal Reserve note. This is a very short quote at the top, so I'm going to read it. I really like it. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. George Orwell. This is about controlling history. And it's becoming a very prevalent thought nowadays, considering what's happening in different countries around the world. Federal Reserve note. I use the abbreviation in my writing, FRN. Now, one of the things that's interesting about the Federal Reserve note is that on its face it says, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. We think, and I used to think, I knew what that meant. After a little study, I found out, no, I didn't know what it means. You go onto the Fed's website, which I did, and there is a note that says, I'm going to read this, there is, however, no federal statute mandating that a private business, a person, or organization must accept currency or coin as payment for goods and or services. Well, that wasn't my understanding of legal tender. You're supposed to take it. They want you to take it. But there's actually, in the U.S., there's no federal mandate or federal statute that says you have to.
So it's strange that they put that on the note. It's
Very
almost
strange.
like a pretend.
Well, when you don't fully study words or terms, it's easy to, let's say, get misled, and then you believe the mislead. Now to the Federal Reserve note. Some people will say, well, it says note on it means it's a debt. No, it's not. The Federal Reserve note is printed by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, which is a department of the U.S. Treasury. Back in the day, early 2000s, the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, the Bureau charged the Fed a fixed per note charge, 6.4 cents, regardless of denomination. That has since changed. And for today, because it varies between 5.5 cents and 14 cents a note, let's just say 10 cents a note. The group out of the Fed that orders the printing is an office called the Cash Products Office. They order, the Fed prints, the Bureau prints. So sitting on the loading docks of the Bureau, waiting for a Fed armored truck to come pick these Federal Reserve notes up, there could be what I call millions and millions of street value dollars sitting on the loading dock. To the Bureau, it's not money. It's not that millions and millions of dollars, no. Again, round numbers for the conversation. It's 10 cents a note. It's just a print job, nothing more. As I've said before, this is like going to your local printer who printed up some pamphlets for you or some flyers, and they're sitting on the counter. That printer, that business, it's just a print job. The Fed takes it, and we'll get into this. We'll get in this next go round. But the upshot is, to the Fed, in the hands of the Fed, billions and billions of street value dollars in their vault. All that represents is nothing more than a printing expense. Nothing more. No debt, nothing. Now we're in Module 8, and this is how do Federal Reserve notes, and I'll just focus on that. Coins are somewhat of a similar path. How does the Federal Reserve note become part of the M1 money supply? As we earlier stated, first it's printed by the Bureau. It's just the print job to them. Moves to the Fed. At the Fed, it's just a printing expense. A regular, ordinary, everyday, nothing special business expense. Next, it moves to banks. Banks have to give up one of their electronic reserves for every dollar of physical reserves they get, Federal Reserve notes, which means in the hands of a bank, all the Federal Reserve notes sit in their vault and teller drawers. It's nothing but reserves in physical form. Because if the bank finally decided, I got too much of this, I don't want this here, somebody might rob me, they send it back to the Fed. The Fed takes it. They'll increase that bank's electronic reserve account on their books. Done. Now, final step, step 4. You go to your ATM or you go to the teller and you take out 100. In the hands of that teller, that 100, let's say 520s, is reserves, bank reserves in physical form. As soon as it touches your hand, and as soon as that teller reduces your checking account balance, those Federal Reserve notes, that cash, has just become part of the M1 money supply, physical money. Your total supply has not changed. It's just changed form. Your electronic digits have decreased by 100. Your physical has increased by 100. That's it. So now we move on to 9. This one I spent time on because it's so out there that, the Fed is not private. The Fed is quasi-public, is a term I've heard. And as I've said before, calling the Fed quasi-public would be saying that a woman is quasi-pregnant. No. One or the other. And here is a list of all the different things that I've studied and researched and discovered that tells me that the Fed is absolutely, totally private. No questions asked. Any your thoughts, Mario?
About the private ownership of the Fed? No, I mean, I've known it for quite a while. There's an old saying about the Fed being as federal as Federal Express and having
exactly.
no reserves.
But the thing is, and I've used that expression too, but I add to it. The difference is Federal Express delivers, the Fed takes.
Yeah, that's a good one too. And the thing to note about the Federal Reserve is that if you go into their data online, you can find, I think it's H4B. It has all their assets and liabilities.
Mm-hmm.
All the assets are in the 12 regional banks. They're private corporations owned by the commercial private banks within their district. And the only part of the system that's not private, like the 12 banks, is the Federal Reserve Board in Washington, D.C. But all the assets are in these private banks. So when people say, oh, the Fed's balance sheet has gone to $7 trillion in assets, it has, and it's all privately owned as well.
Right. Each Fed bank, there's 12 of them, 12 regional Fed banks. They're all independent, privately owned, run for profit. Each Fed bank has stockholders. And I learned about this when I read the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, page 8, section 7. the stockholders of each of these private corporate Fed banks are the member banks within the region. In some of my research, I found that the first Fed bank was the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Most people know, or a lot of people know, the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 was signed by Woodrow Wilson, and I'm going to say this because I mean it, may he rot, December 23rd, 1913. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York, incorporated in May of 1914, had its first board of directors meeting in October of 1914 and went operational in November 1914. Each one of these is a private corporation owned by the member banks.
Just in time for to finance World War I guess.
Among other things. The stockholders of each bank, of each Fed bank, at that time were entitled to a 6% annual dividend based on their capital. Most banks still get some dividend. The max is still 6%. But to me, the kicker is that, and this is not talked about much, it's known that the net, and I'm use the term slightly loosely, the net profits of each Fed bank is transferred to the U.S. Treasury. What is not talked about, and it's very clear in the 1913 law, this is a franchise tax. Only private businesses pay franchise taxes to governments. The Fed is absolutely, totally private.
Yeah, why would a public part of the government pay tax to the government?
They don't, and
yeah.
but they are liable to their local entities for property taxes. So now we'll begin kind of where we left off last time, just highlighting Module 10. And my thoughts on this are, there's a big push in this world to go fully electronic. And I see so many problems with this. The quote at the top, and part of it is 2 is 1, 1 is none. That comes from the U.S. Navy SEAL teams. And I take that to mean if you have 2, then you're okay. If you only have 1, you have no options. You have no choices. Things can go wrong quick. And if you want to get an idea of what it would be like to have a cashless society and then something go wrong, think about Greece or Cyprus when they shut down the banks. Okay, you're not walking in, you're not accessing an ATM, you have no computer access to your account, it's shut down. And it shut down for 5 or 6 days. If you didn't have cash, you weren't transacting any business. No one would take a check, not in their right mind. And how are you going to verify checking accounts? Do you remember that, Mario?
Yeah, I remember the term is, you could get Cyprused or bailed in. So, I remember it well.
So for me, when this happens, if you don't have physical money, you can be locked out.
The other thing as well, it gives banks, there's no way to have bank runs anymore because if there's problem in the banking system, the first thing they'll do is shut the system down. So, and the other thing, I think the banks will become even more reckless because what's the point of having cash reserves if you don't have cash, right? So they're going to leverage themselves even more. And they'll keep track of everything you do electronically as well. You lose privacy as well, I would say.
There's no privacy. The other thing is that in my research, I found that Social Security Administration, this is at this time, I don't know if they're still doing it, but every month they would declare 1,000 people dead that were in fact not dead. Well, when you're declared dead by Social Security, you're eventually going to get kicked out of your bank account, credit access, everything. And you can spend months trying to convince Social Security you're not dead. But until you are locked out. Then there's the problem of just being completely dependent on computers, computer access, electricity. I think I mentioned this last time, the Carrington event that took place in the 1850s.
Yeah.
1858. Well, God forbid should we have anything like that. It wiped out all the telegraphs. Well, if we had an event like that in this country, or on the planet now, what's going to happen to all the computers? They're fried. And it's not a matter of, well, my computer crashed, I'll go get it fixed. No, it's all fried, which means all your monetary wealth is not accessible. And to give you an idea of what it's like to lose access, I think it was a year or so ago, there was a Canadian crypto exchange, and the man running it died, God rest his soul. And what happened? He died with the code. He died with the key. No one could get in. If you don't have an alternative, as in physical money, that means all your monetary wealth is electronic. It's in a computer somewhere you have no access to direct. You have no control over it. You can be locked out. And if computers go away, internet goes away, electricity goes away, one or all three, you have no access to your money. That doesn't, to me, invite confidence. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only one way to protect yourself would be to have some gold and silver coins, the old junk silver coins, because if that were to happen, people would barter with those, or, to live in the countryside, as Mark Faber said yesterday in my interview with him. You need to try to get out of the big cities, because if this kind of thing happens, it's going to be, it's not going to be pretty. A lot of riots and violence, I think. So, yeah.
All right, so let's move on to Module 11. The Module 11 is, what is a Ponzi scheme?
Okay.
I'm going to read the quote. When plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men living together in society, they create for themselves in the course of time a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it. Frederick Bastiat, 1801 to 1850. Mr. Bastiat lives in France. He died in Rome, Italy from tuberculosis. But in 1849, he had a pamphlet published called The Law. I know you can find it out. I found it out on the web as a PDF. It is an absolute great read.
Yeah, I have the book here.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorites.
It's absolutely one of my, I studied it extremely well, took a lot of notes on it, could do a whole show on him. Anyway, Ponzi, Carlo or Charles Ponzi, December 19, he convinced investors to invest in his new, I'll call it a scheme. They were dealing with European currency prices. And
stamps, wasn't it?
Fly coupons.
Yeah.
Well, what he was able to do without doing, he may have done a few trades initially, but eventually he did no business at all. He just got people to believe in what he was doing. And they kept bringing the money in. He kept spending it. He kept paying the old investors on the new investors. But the upshot is he had no legitimate, real, for-profit business operation. I mean, it's one thing to be in business and try really hard and not generate a profit. Okay, but at least you were in business and you were doing something. He did nothing.
Yeah, what I read about Charles Ponzi is that he was arbitraging the difference in the exchange rate when he bought the stamp, for example, in Spain, and then you sold it in the US. And there was a little bit of a discrepancy, but you'd have to do billions of stamps to make the money that he said you could. So it was just like a theory. And a lot of people didn't really, a lot of people, as we see today, they don't think for themselves, and they just buy into things.
Yeah, originally I think he actually did do some arbitrage. And arbitrage being buying it in one locale and selling it in another for a profit. Because of the price differential.
Oh, by the way, he eventually went to live in Brazil, and he died in Rio, where I'm originally from.
I believe he died as a pauper, but
yeah.
And he did do some jail time.
Mm.
But the important thing about this is most people know about the term Ponzi scheme is that ultimately you do not have a for-profit business. I mean, in this case, it's not even set up. It's not operating. And people got so jacked up because he was paying out these huge returns monthly. They go, okay, this is great. I'm in. And he just kept turning the money until finally he ran out of new investors. But basically, a Ponzi is a fraudulent scam or scheme that's portrayed as a great business opportunity. And people believe it. Now let's get to U.S. Treasuries. Bills, bonds, and notes. What for-profit business is the U.S. government in? And taxation isn't it. Taxation is not profit-making, from my point of view. It's profit-taking. I'll take the position the U.S. government has no for-profit business. Therefore, it can never repay its debts from profits. Which means, if I'm correct, the federal government is running a massive, now $26.4 trillion Treasury debt Ponzi scheme.
Well, they would argue that someone opposed to your view would argue that they have the power to tax. That's their, they take the profit from the private economy. But I know what you mean. What about the unfunded liabilities? There's like over 100 trillion as well.
I'll deal with the first and then the second.
Yeah, okay. Sorry.
As I said, no, it's great. Taxation is profit taking. It's not a for-profit business. That's one. Two, if that's all it took, then why does the national government have 26.4 trillion in debt? Because taxation is never enough. A little history on the debt, and I'm not sure if we get to that. No. History on the debt. During Andrew Jackson's time, a very controversial president, he actually paid the debt down to zero. Now, if you look at the Treasury records, which is year by year, the lowest, I think, that it's reporting is around 1835, about 35,000. It was in January, I believe, of 1835, he actually paid it down to zero. He was able to do that, or he was able to have that accomplished because they were selling land out west. Over time, it kept growing, get back and forth. By around 1958, give or take a year, That was the last time the national debt decreased year after year. We got to the first trillion owed 1981. So it took 191 years, give or take, to get to the first trillion in debt. Pole vault ahead 39 years, and we've added over 25 trillion. Now, does that really sound sustainable? No. I looked at it in a time frame between the first day of Clinton and the last day of Obama. On the last day of Obama, the Treasury debt was just sitting under 20 trillion. It just wasn't moving. But for round numbers, I'll just say 20. Between the first day of Clinton and the last day of Obama, the Treasury debt increased approximately $15.5 trillion, which meant on the first day of the current president, 78% of the debt had been acquired in the prior 24 years. Does that really sound sustainable? Is that really going to be taken care of by taxation?
No, it's going to be, I think, inflated away.
See, I don't see that coming. I see something else. But to end this, so the other thing you talked about, the unfunded liabilities. In 2012, Lawrence Kotlikoff, an economist out of, I believe, Boston, wrote a paper. At that time, in 2012, he did a present value analysis of the unfunded liabilities, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. This is his number, present value, 2012. He said the present value of the unfunded liabilities in 2012 was over $200 trillion. Hey, this is unpayable. This is absolutely, totally unpayable. You can't inflate this away. So for me...
Yeah, you're right about the Ponzi scheme, though, because if the government was running an honest, how can I say, organization...
For-profit business?
No, but an honest government, you would only spend what you take in taxes, and you'd have no debt, right? That's now I understand what you meant. So yeah, why all this extra debt? That's the problem.
Well, Thomas Jefferson, third president of the United States, his idea was that if the federal government borrowed, it would have to create and levy a tax that would cover all the principal and interest that would be owed. Obviously, this is long before income tax in the U.S. And as a close, part of the takeaway on this is, I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Top Gun.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's that scene early on where Stinger is dressing down our hero Maverick for what he just did. And the quote is, "Your ego is writing checks your body can't cash." Well, our government is incurring debt it can't satisfy.
Well, Dick Cheney said it didn't matter, though.
Well,
you remember that? He said deficits don't matter, but...
Well, see, that's interesting in that I guess he's expecting to die before it matters, or he is in such a position that what happens doesn't affect him.
That's right.
However, okay, I'm sitting up on a hill, and I build myself a little pond to hold water. But I don't make it a really big pond, and I don't make sure that the pond is really stable. Well, the pond fails, doesn't affect me. You, Mario, are down the hill.
Yeah. No,
Skin will affect you.
I'm not saying he was right
Yeah,
about that because I have no respect for Dick Cheney. So it
agreed.
just shows you the kind of person he is by saying that.
Right. So we go to module 12,
Yeah.
and now we start to get into some of the heavies. Why the Fed must be replaced. I'm going to read this quote. The Federal Reserve definitely caused, listen to this, the Federal Reserve definitely caused the Great Depression by contracting the amount of currency in circulation by 1/3 from 1929 to 1933. Milton Friedman, Nobel Prize winner. He wrote a book, The Monetary History of the U.S., the United States, 1867 to 1960. And I'm sorry, I'm blanking on this co-author.
Yeah, it's a lady. I forgot.
Yes.
Yeah. I forgot her name now.
Anna Schwartz.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Anyway, so why does I'm thinking, okay, Alan, I get this, but really, why? What is the problem with what the Fed is, what it's doing? Okay, fine, it's private, but we're motoring along, we're doing okay, and we'll ignore the 26.4 trillion in debt because somehow the federal government can continue to find more lenders. Well, first of all, the Fed it's been said that it has a dual mandate. Now, dual to me means two. Yet it does three, it's supposed to do three things. Maximize employment of people and resources, maintain stable prices, and maintain moderate long-term interest rates. That's three things. So the Fed doesn't know the difference between 2 and 3. That's a concern to me right there. Anyway, you're not going to maintain maximum employment of resources and people without moderate long-term interest rates, and you're not going to have moderate long-term interest rates without stable prices. But you can't have stable prices with constant inflation. The Fed targets inflation.
Yeah.
They're happy and screaming yippee if they get 2%. Well, inflation is a term that's out there. 2% sounds pretty de minimis. Who cares? Well, the other phrase for inflation is loss of purchasing power. And to bring this home, in 1914, when the Fed went operational, one 1914 dollar had the purchasing power of 100 1914 pennies. Of course, 100 pennies to the dollar. And when I've done this in a speech, that's when I take my little baggie of 100 pennies and I drop it to the floor. Boom. Today's dollar has the purchasing power of 2 to 3 1914 pennies. Then I drop that baggie and it kind of floats to the ground. Okay, our dollar today in the US compared to 1914 is practically worthless.
And the other thing as well, the 2% supposedly inflation is really the CPI. And the CPI has been doctored for years. I don't know if you've looked at shadow stats. So the debasement, I think, is even bigger than 2%.
It very well could be. And yeah, the consumer CPI, consumer price index. Well, imagine, because in England you all play football. We call it soccer here in the US. Now, when the game starts, everybody on the field knows the rules. They're absolutely clear on what the rules are. And and there are officials out there, referees, to make sure that all the players follow the rules. Okay, cool. That's great. With CPI, you have the rules changing
During the game.
In the middle of the game. And, okay, we're going to include this, but we're not going to include this. Well, why aren't you going to include this? Well, it would make the CPI look bad. Like like the cost of food and fuel. Oh, those are hardly material.
Well, the other one is substitution. If fillet steak is gone too, the price has gone up too much, we'll replace that with spam.
Yeah. Anyway, why does the Fed must be replaced? Number one, its primary job is to maintain stable prices. Constantly increasing prices are not stable. Stable to me is not changing, not just constantly going up at a stable rate. And yes, to your point, very good point. If you can change how you define inflation, you can nail it to 2%. And most people aren't going to complain about 2%.
Yeah, it's more, I mean, it takes 20, 30 years for you to notice. So like in the short term, yeah, people won't really complain. And then younger people are coming up and they don't remember, how it was 20 years before.
Right. I remember back in the day, when I bought my first tank of gas, I don't even think I even paid 30 cents a gallon. I remember leaving U.S. in early 1974. I spent 6 months in Europe. It was a great time. I came back. This was during the oil embargo. We had one car made by Ford at the time. It was called a Pinto.
Yeah, I remember that.
And when I left, because there'd be advertisements on TV, they were selling for under, like $800-900 for a car. No. When I came back, I turned on the TV, sitting down for the first time, see a Pinto ad. It's selling for $1,500-1,800. And I'm thinking, what happened in 6 months?
Yeah.
Crazy.
I remember the Pinto, they had to take it out of, they had a problem with it would explode or something, didn't it?
Well, apparently, little design problem.
Yeah.
Apparently, if the Pinto, some of them were rear-ended in a car accident, because of the location position of the gas tank, it might catch on fire.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember, I grew up in Brazil, but we went to the States probably in early 70s. My dad used to sail, and we went to Miami. And I remember buying, like my mom giving me a quarter and a dime, and I'd go to in the club, I'd go and buy like a drink and some chocolate. So it was a lot of money, a quarter and a dime. And nowadays, you get nothing for a quarter.
Not much.
No.
Not much. I'm going to close Module 12 with this. This is the takeaway. And you may recall the movie Dirty Harry.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're going to live day to day, moment to moment, which is really what we're doing with this monetary system, then you might consider asking yourself this one very important question, which is the quote from Dirty Harry. You feel lucky? Well, do you, punk? Well, do ya? I'm not feeling lucky.
No.
So we move on to 13. 13 is what monetary system can replace the Fed? I'm going to go to another quote from Milton Friedman, which really speaks to the federal government today, not the way it was originally designed by the founders. If you put the federal government in charge of the Sahara Desert, in 5 years there'd be a shortage of sand. Gives you an idea of what Dr. Friedman thought of the federal government. My vision, and this might be considered controversial, but it's at least an idea. keeping in mind, back to module 1, who created money? Who developed it? Who matured it? Who actually, in our current system, holds it? People.
People in the marketplace, I guess. Yeah.
Well, people and businesses.
Yeah.
Not banks, not governments, not the Fed. So what I'm envisioning is, and I'm not anti-bank. I don't want to get rid of banks. I'm not anti-bank people, businesses, buildings. No, keep them. I want to take one thing away from them. Banks no longer get to be creators of money. If you want to deposit there, deposit there. They want a loan, they're going to loan out of their own hide. They don't
or they can lend, if I deposit $1,000 with a bank and tell them, can you please lend, you can lend that out, then they can lend it out, but they can't just create it. They have to have it in their, in their books.
That's what I mean. They got to lend out of their own hide. They don't get to create money anymore, which begs the question, who is going to create money? I envision, again, for lack of a better term, a national bank. This national bank would be the only creator of money in our system. The national bank would be owned, controlled, directed, monitored, reports to the people. It's our bank. I'm not going to call it, excuse me for coughing, I'm not going to call it the People's Bank because that just sounds too communistic. So I'll call it the National Bank. It would, in part, it would create money to fund the federal government based on approved budgets. Now, this is where people need to, must, and can get involved. Federal government, we want to see your budget by this date. We don't like it. We're going to start barking about the money you want our national bank to fund for you so you can spend without needing to tax or borrow. See, this is the beauty part. The federal government would only be funded through the national bank, which belongs to we the people. Since they can only get their funding from the national bank, there's no need for taxation. In fact, the IRS goes away.
And they don't have to borrow from the bankers, private bankers.
And there's no more borrowing. You only get money spendable from the people. And that's based on approved budgets. Now, the other thing the national bank could do many things. One, let's say you've got a state that's and I'm not sure if this is constitutional, but let's say it is. And the state needs funding for something, good public project. Well, you could come to the national bank and borrow at a very low, stable interest rate. That means the state doesn't have to go out into the marketplace and float high interest bonds. Hey, that's nice. Another thing is, let's say, God forbid, of course, we don't have one, but we have 2 or 3 Katrinas. You remember Katrina? The big hurricane that hit New Orleans?
Yep.
Well, the people of this country would want to help out and fix all the damage from these storms. Well, to fund this, the federal government could request emergency funding from the National Bank. Spend it into circulation, fix all the problems. Well, if you have too much money in circulation based on the level of economy, you get inflation, which means the national bank could then implement, it could be national, it could be local, it could be regional, whatever, in essence, a sales tax. The sales tax is not to raise any kind of revenue or income or whatever. It's just to actually be able to extinguish money out of the system until the supply is equal to the economy. Sales tax goes away, we go along our merry way. Now the money supply is being controlled for the benefit of the people. The money supply is being provided in part to fund the federal government, so it has no need or ability to levy a tax or issue debt. I like this system.
Yeah, it sounds good. One thing I would say, though, what about the Constitution already provides for doesn't it say that
Well, you're talking about
about
Article
coining
1.
money, gold and silver
Yeah.
Act,
Well,
Coinage Act, and
Article 1, Section
artic-
8, and
yeah,
I should have brought my pocket Constitution, but I didn't. Article 1, Section 8 is for the federal government, and it says that the federal government, you know, in part can coin or use gold and silver. No, wait a minute. No, it can coin money. Gold and silver is the limitation on the state. The point is, the Constitution maybe have to be amended, but we in this country have now seen what has happened with the creation of the Fed, the allowing banks to be the sole creators of our money, to have a system of taxation that our founders never would have envisioned, to have a national debt that is absolutely totally unpayable.
yeah, I agree with you on those. I think during the prior to having a Federal Reserve and a central bank, I think you could, let's say you went to California and mined for gold, or Alaska, and you got some gold, you could take it to the nearest mint and they would coin it into money. So you could still have that, though, in your system, because people could decide to use gold and silver as money as well, because there wouldn't be any taxes, so they could deal with each other in those coins as well, and in the government issued paper as well.
What I'm trying to do is basically put a tight collar and a short leash on the federal government.
Yeah,
And
that's
their
good.
acts, and we need to get rid of taxation. We need to get rid of the ability to acquire unpayable debt. And the way to do that is to and Congress has failed, has utterly failed, because they've allowed this to happen.
Yeah, and that's the only. I mean, your idea sounds very good. The only problem I have is, can you trust the people? Because the people, they're going to have to elect people to do that for them. And as we know, politicians, people who are usually elected into positions of power, they're not the best people, are they? Morally or ethically or anything like that.
Right.
So you got to make sure there is no way to abuse this system as well, because if there is, they'll find a way as well.
To that point, thank you for bringing that up. Again, this is my draft idea, and I'm always willing to entertain others.
No, I like your idea. I like that you eliminate the power of the private banks.
Yes.
And you eliminate, the national debt and taxation, because you don't need that.
Now,
I think here in the UK, when World War I started, there was a guy in the Treasury called Bradbury, his name, and he told the government, let's start issuing Treasury notes and pay for the war with that. And it worked for a few months, but then it was put aside because the bankers weren't happy. So they were like greenbacks, Bradbury pounds, if you look into it.
Okay. The thing is that the way I currently envision this is, and at the Congress level, the states, prior to the 17th Amendment, they sent 2 senators from their state. These people were not elected in the government. They were sent by the state legislatures to represent the states. Going back to the founding and the Constitution, the federal government came from that. Who created the Constitution? 13 independent, sovereign, kick your khaki states. That's who created it.
Yeah.
And the intention was to have a very limited federal government. And one way that the states were going to keep let's say, their hand in the pie, because they were going to have representation in Congress, the Senate. The people, they had the House. The states had the Senate. Well, this wasn't going to work really well for the progressives of the early 1900s. And somehow they were able to engineer the 17th Amendment. For me, I'll call it the National Bank. Every state would have representatives that would be sent, and how the state wants to do it, whether it comes from the legislature, whether it comes from elections, I don't care at this moment, but each state has representation in running the national bank. And they have the ability, power, and requirement to report back to their people in their state, what is the bank doing? What's the money supply? Is there any inflation? On and on and on. The kicker's this. Imagine you have a teenager, most likely a boy, and you give him the keys of the car. He goes out, he gets drunk, and he crashes it. So next week, you give him the keys to the car. Do you really think it's not going to happen again? Of course you're not going to do that. We have to learn as citizen owners in this country, we have to keep our hands on the short leash attached to the tight collar to the people that we elect or send into government positions. If we don't, what they do is on us. This national bank would give the people every reason, every right, and every duty to keep track of what's going on in their monetary system. This way, you get rid of the unpayable debt, you don't incur anymore, you get rid of taxation at the federal level. Okay, this is worth doing a few push-ups for. Keeping track, and part of it is keeping track of what the national bank's doing, part of it is keeping track of what your people are doing. So yeah, it's going to require a little personal involvement, just like raising a teenager to not get drunk and crash the car.
Yeah.
We got to get involved. My phrase is wake up, stand up, get involved, stay involved. If we don't, then we have no position to complain from. We let it happen on our watch. And given our current monetary system, this is in the US, of course, it gives us three things. It gives us inflation, which is god-awful. It gives us federal taxation, and now currently totally, absolutely unpayable national debt. These are three things in our face every day.
Yeah, it's the same thing here in the UK. So it's everywhere around the world. I think Russia is the only country that has very low national debt. I think it's less than 20% of their GDP.
The thing, well, number one, this is in our face every day. And we are told this is not a problem. This is okay. This is normal. This is average. Just that attitude is the problem.
Yeah.
And whether you measure national debt based on sheer numbers or percent of GDP, it's still debt that's owed by a non-profit making corporate business entity.
Yeah. And I think the reason people don't get more upset about it is that it's not like when you owe money that you have to pay it yourself. When it's a national debt like that, you don't worry about it because you leave it to posterity or futurity, as Thomas Jefferson said. So, and all it means is that future generations are going to be enslaved even more. They're going to be paying more tax. Inflation is a tax as well.
Yeah, it's called the hidden tax. The thing is that, like any Ponzi, you eventually run out of new investors. that's when it gets really ugly. So for me and posterity, futurity, we owe our future something more than unpayable debt. We really do. We're messing this up, and we got to get involved. We got to stay involved. We got to understand the lies that have been told to us. We got to move on. We got to fix this.
I think the only people who benefit from this debt-based system are the bankers and the corporations around them, and the politicians as well, because they buy the votes with that. They pay themselves well as well, but they're not really serving the public.
The public, given that this monetary system, the Federal Reserve System, gives the U.S. citizen inflation, federal taxation, and national debt, this system is a total failure. Absolutely total.
I think Ron Paul or someone has told that to Ben Bernanke, and his answer is, yes, it is true, but Congress voted the Federal Reserve Act. The people wanted it in 1913. That's his answer. I've heard that said before, but I think most senators were away, had gone back home for Christmas already when they brought that to the Senate.
There was it was signed by Woodrow Wilson on December 23rd. It was passed by the House and the Senate earlier, and they had a pretty full load of people. The bottom line is that, okay, this is an amazing sleight of hand, what you just said, that Ben Bernanke would say, oh yeah, everything you said is true. It's absolutely god-awful terrible. But Congress did something incredibly stupid over 100 years ago, so everything's okay.
Yeah, he doesn't say stupid, but he said that's what Congress, that's what the people wanted back then. There were people like, have you heard of Charles Lindbergh Sr.?
Yes.
He was a great opponent of the Federal Reserve, and also Louis McFadden as well. So there were people. Yeah, I mean, there were people against it, but they were all they're all like denigrated in the mainstream press because the bankers control the press. So
the other thing about the Federal Reserve Act is when it came off of Jekyll Island, Senator Aldrich promoted it. It was called the Aldrich Plan, and it got some pushback, and they reworked it. And then the news went out. All the banks hate it. Oh, well, heck, if the banks hate it, it's got to be good for us. You're right.
They're very, they're clever, these people.
And the thing, 1913 may be the absolute worst legislative year in all of the U.S. We got the 16th, 17th Amendment, and the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 may not have been properly ratified. There's a book out there, very long book by Bill Benson called The Law That Never Was. They needed 36 states to ratify. Allegedly, they had 38. Which means if you get rid of 3 states, you do not have a properly ratified amendment to the Constitution. Excuse me. More than 3 states had it in their state constitution at the time that before you could consider agreeing to a constitutional amendment at this, a state, you had to wait till after the next election cycle so it could become part of the election cycle. I believe it was more than 3 states that didn't do that. The 16th Amendment, which gave us IRS, was not properly ratified. The other thing is, if you go back to 1913, and nobody really objected to it. Well, the lowest tax rate was 1%. The highest tax rate was 6%. To be subject to 1%, you had to have taxable income in excess of $20,000. How many people do you think had taxable income in excess of $20,000?
Well, very few. That was a lot of money back then, wasn't it?
And that means you're going to get hit with $200 worth of tax? Whoopee. Most people probably didn't care about the 16th Amendment because it's never going to apply to me. So that's Module 13. So we move on to Module 14. And actually, some of this I think I already covered in our chat, which is who will benefit from the new monetary system. Well, when the people have control of the supply, the creation and extinguishment of the money, people will benefit. I got two really neat quotes here, or one, and I'm going to add to another. This came from James Garfield, President of the United States. Whomever controls the volume of money in any country is absolute master of all industry and commerce. James Garfield.
Wasn't he assassinated?
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
Apparently somebody didn't like his attitude. Henry Kissinger said something to the effect, control oil, control the country, control food, control the people. And I would add this, when you control the monetary system, you control oil and control food.
Yeah, and there was Mayor Amschel Rothschild who said, give me control of a country's money and I care not who makes the laws.
Right. Yeah, that was the original. So, the upshot of this is that, again, we covered a lot of it. When people, directly or indirectly through their representatives, control money creation, money extinguishment, the money supply, are able to fund their federal government without it taxing or borrowing, who benefits? We do. More importantly, our posterity benefits. And we do the duty that was given to us by our founders, which is to take care. And currently we're not. The other thing I would suggest is we would rename our national currency. Obviously get rid of the term Federal Reserve now. And my current suggestion for the new currency, we call them patriots. So that's for any questions on 14 for you?
No, it sounds good. Patriots.
Module 15. Go ahead.
Module 15? Okay,
Yeah.
No, that's fine.
Module 15, what's the process to install a new monetary system? Like the quote I use for this one is, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, Thomas Jefferson. And to me, eternal vigilance isn't just being out there looking, it's out there doing. We need to do. We need to get involved, we need to stay involved. But to install this system, we're going to have the Federal Reserve Act and all of its amendments repealed. To get this done, fortunately, it's not a constitutional amendment. It's simply a law. We got to get Congress to do it. To get Congress to do it, the upshot of all of this is we, the people, individually, we have to pound on our elected employees in D.C. I suggest emails and phone calls, because letters they may or may not read. But you overload their inbox with emails, you overload their answering machines with phone calls, you go to their local or in-state offices, and you tell them, get this done. Now, I'm going to check your movie history again. Do you remember, darn it, Now I'm forgetting the name of the movie.
Well,
Okay.
if before you remember it, I just
Yeah.
want to say one thing, because I'm in the UK, and some of my UK viewers might be saying, why are you
Yeah.
talking about the US? But I think it's really important if the Americans do move towards some kind of monetary and banking reform, because and in a good way, of course, because it gives the world a good example, because the US is still the biggest economy out there. So we need it as bad as the US needs. I think our national debt here started racking up in 1692. So, that's when William III borrowed the first £1,000,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
To your point, yeah, I am talking about the U.S. because that's the system I know.
Yeah.
I don't believe, or it's my understanding, I should say, that the English system is very similar to ours.
Oh, the Fed was copied. The model was the Bank of England.
And when we get, next go round, when we get to an in-depth discussion of Module 16, which is the bookkeeping and banking, I want you to know that your good people at the Bank of England said something in a writing called Money Creation in the Modern Economy. It was absolute confirmation of what I had come to know. And I'm thinking, I got this from the Bank of England?
Yeah, did you know William Patterson, he was one of the founders of the Bank of England in 1694.
Okay.
And he said, the bank hath the benefit of interest on money or book entries created out of thin air. So
I'd love to see that quote.
yeah, just it's William Patterson with one T, founder of the Bank of England, William Patterson quote. So
I'll look it up.
That was the model. It was the Bank of England.
Well, the movie I remembered,
Yeah.
Burt Reynolds was in it, is called Deliverance.
Yeah, I remember watching that.
Okay,
Deliverance.
that movie disturbed me beyond it because I was pretty young at the time.
Yeah, me too. I don't remember it too well.
Yeah,
but
they were in the mountains, the backwoods. I don't remember.
Yeah,
what state.
somewhere. Yeah.
And you had this song, the dueling banjos. But after watching, I remember leaving the movie theater, walking across the parking lot, going, "I'm going back to cartoons. This is too much. It's too intense." But in there, there was a term that the guys encountered from the backwoods people, and so I'm going to paraphrase this. And we can do all kinds of things originally in the email to the as you know, I call them elected employees because we're citizen owners, and in the phone calls. But basically, you can bring it down to 3 words, and you may understand the connection to the one word to deliverance. And you're telling these people in DC, repeal or squeal. We got to get this done.
Yeah.
And it's on us to get this done. For England, it is, you have a monetary system the same or very similar to ours. You have taxation, you have national debt, and you have federal government that has gone way beyond what was originally envisioned. In the U.S., absolutely.
Well, here as well, I think there was no income tax up until after the Napoleonic Wars. And even then they said, "Oh, this is just going to be temporary." And it was very low. Very few people paid it. But then, it just crept up. Then everyone's paying now.
Well,
but hopefully the collapse, if this system collapses, because as you said, it's not sustainable. hopefully, yeah, I think it can only improve out of a crisis.
I would say this. I don't want to survive Armageddon. I want to prevent it. Uh, I don't want to survive a heart attack. I want to prevent it. I'm going to eat right. Excuse me. I'm going to eat right. I'm going to, do my exercise, keep my weight down.
I agree, but these, unfortunately, when it's a system like that, they try to keep it going as long as possible without reforming it. Usually the only way that things change is because of a big crisis, isn't it?
Yeah, to me, and I've heard the terms, and sometimes I get real picky. I don't want to reform the system. I don't want to repair the system.
You're on a new system.
Replace the system.
Yeah, replace, yeah.
And when people...
That's what I meant.
Yeah, I know. And the more people get to know this, the more there will be a demand for this, which is, wait a minute, you're telling me if we do these few things, we can basically get rid of inflation, loss of purchasing power. We can get rid of the IRS in all of its forms, and we can eventually pay off and get rid of a currently unpayable Ponzi scheme national debt. I'm in. The thing is again, back to the U.S., we're at 26.4 more trillion. And last time we talked about the magnitude of the trillion. Who could get hurt should the Ponzi scheme fail? Well, if you want to get a current idea, or a recent occurrence of a Ponzi scheme failing, you look at Bernie Madoff, who's currently doing 150 years. And he had a few thousand investors, and there was a 60 billion loss. Okay, so that's significant, especially if that's your money. But what happens if the U.S. government can't make good on its treasuries in whole or part? Well, who are some of the biggest investors? Public and private pensions. And these entities are already seriously underfunded. Okay. They can't collect on their treasuries, and they had to invest in treasuries because they're AAA rated. They can't collect on that. Their pensioners are gone. Who else is one of the big holders? Social Security. Social Security in the past would always bring in more funds into the general fund than they would pay out. So the excess, the surplus, was used to buy treasuries. How convenient. They can only buy treasuries. So the U.S. Treasury had a ready buyer in Social Security. Well, beginning this year, going forward, it's estimated that more will be going out than coming in, which means the Social Security will have to start redeeming, not rolling over, and not buying new treasury debt. It's estimated between around 2034, 2035, that reserve is going to be tapped out, gone.
So I guess the other thing as well, if this system were to bring in a new system, you could always pay the Social Security with your Patriot dollars, couldn't you?
Yes.
So the people who would get hurt would be the people who own the Federal Reserve.
Oh, I have special plans for the Fed.
Okay. Maybe we can talk about that in part 3.
Well, in part 3, what I'd like to do is I want to talk about Module 16, which you don't have to show right now. Module 16 is basically where it hits the road.
How do banks? Let me just share it quickly so people can see. Hold on, where is this?
Well, it's how do banks and their Fed monetary system lie, cheat, and steal?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's it.
So we're going to go through that, and then we're going to go through the bookkeeping, how they do it.
Right, we'll show that next time.
Yeah, and then Module 17, when do we begin? That's the plan of action?
Yeah, it's the call to action.
Call to action, yeah.
And then there's a draft email.
Okay, and then module 18.
Module 18 is more for me. It is three, not that we would discuss it, it's 3 pages of quotes that I accumulated over time. And there you go. There you've got, if you scroll back, there. Wait a minute. Second page of module 18. Yeah, there's Lewis T. McFadden.
Yeah, Lewis McFadden there, yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, there's the other guy, Wright Patman. I remember, I've heard of him too.
Now, the other thing, and we could discuss some of these. Don't move the page. Right now, you've got Lewis T. McFadden. You got Carol Quigley, a historian's historian. And then you have, okay.
Then you have your hero, David Rockefeller.
No, he's yours. He's yours. This is so. When I found this,
Carol Quigley was Bill Clinton's professor at Georgetown, wasn't he?
Yeah. When I found this quote, and I'd seen it on the web, and I was so wanting to make sure that I got this quote correct, that I actually bought his book. And it wasn't hard to find it. It's kind of long, but let me read it. This tells you the mindset of these people. And this came from David Rockefeller himself, his book, Memoirs, 2002, basically an autobiography. For more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidences, such as my encounter with Castro, to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Think about what he's saying people are saying about him and his family. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interest of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, call them globalists now, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that is the charge, I stand guilty and I'm proud of it.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've heard that one before as well. And you show that to people, you talk to them about what's going on right now, and they still say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. But it's hidden in plain sight, these things.
Well, this one's not even hidden. It's in his own book, in his own hand. And it took me about 5 minutes to find it in his book.
There you go.
And I mean, this is a direct quote out of his memoirs.
I think Bill Gates has taken over for him because he died a couple of years ago. He was about 102, I think. So because Bill Gates' family was very close to the Rockefellers, I think.
Right. So, if you want to get an idea of what these people are about, that's it. Now, one of the Rockefeller predecessors, I'm blanking on his name, I'm sorry, the original.
Yeah, well, I think it was David's granddad, John D. Rockefeller. He said he hated competition, didn't he?
There's a quote I saw, I don't have it in front of me, but the upshot was, and this was, let's say, in the 1870s, it's basically, he was saying, consolidation is the future. Consolidation is another way of saying no competition.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's so I like to go over 16 in depth with you.
Is that for next?
Yeah. So next time.
Yeah, we'll start from 16. Okay.
Yeah, we'll start with 16.
That will be part 3.
I like to do 16. Really get into it. talk again about 17, which is just emphasizing the call to action, what
Yeah.
people can do. And if there's any of the quotes you want to talk about or what's going on today, lately, I mean, the U.S. is getting really, really crazy.
Well, here as well, they're really pushing a lot of different new things here, which are not how can I say, conducive to the freedom of the individual, which is something that, I mean, the U.S. Inherited really prior to becoming independent. It was like they call it the right of an Englishman to be sovereign. That's going out the window here too.
My understanding, going back, to that little revolution, one of the things that pissed off the founders and the colonists is that, starting, let's say, the early 1700s, I'm an Englishman, but I'm not being treated like one.
Yeah.
Had they been treated like everybody else, it would have been fine and dandy. But, again, for whatever reason, long before you and me, it went down. And so the Declaration of Independence, and so the complaints, not against the English people, not against the English country, but specifically against King George III. The thing is, your country, my country, we have a long history since then, I guess since after 1812. We work together. We have a common language. We have a lot of common history. We have a common interest in liberty, freedom, and rights. And we need to understand individually, as countries, working together, we are being controlled by our monetary system. Actually, I shouldn't say ours, because it's not ours, it's theirs.
Yeah, that's right. It's true. It's the old saying, who controls the money controls everything. So yeah, we need to take back control of the money, not only in the US, but here in England or in the UK as well. And hopefully we're doing a little bit of our part to help people understand that.
Absolutely. I'm glad we met.
Yeah.
I'm
Great.
so glad that you offered me the opportunity to speak. And the other thing we can do is we can look at some of the comments from the prior shows, and if they're specific as to questions, we can deal with those, because I like to take the position. I've studied, I've researched, and I've thought about this a long time. I believe I'm correct. If I'm not, all you have to do is answer 4 things. What have I said that's not correct? Why is it not correct? What is correct? Why is it correct? No yelling, no screaming, no finger pointing, name calling, cussing. Let's have the conversation. Because at the end of the day, this is about all of us.
Yeah.
And again, it's not just about your today and my today. It's about the future.
Well said. Well said.
Thank you.
I look forward to speaking with you
Been
or
great.
two. Yeah.
Oh, this has been great.